Hi, this is Sarah from So Stories. Let's see who we got today. Oh, we got another story from Paddington. Paddington lay back on the lawn with his paws in the air and gazed up at the Browns. Where am I? He gasped. You're at home, dear, said Mrs. Brown. At number 32, Windsor Gardens. Is that in darkest Peru? asked Paddington. If you ask me, said Mrs. Bird, that's Bear's lost his memory. Oh dear, Henry, exclaimed Mrs. Brown, what shall we do? Paddington seems to have forgotten. Mr. Brown consulted his medical dictionary. All it says here is the victim shouldn't drive a car. I don't think I could anyway, said Paddington. I've hurt my shoulder. Would you like a bun? Suggested Mrs. Brown. What's a bun? asked Paddington. That settles it, said Mrs. Bird. I'm phoning the hospital. So now everybody is worried. Paddington doesn't seem to remember anything. I'm sorry we took so long, said the ambulance driver. When I heard the name Paddington, I went to the railway station by mistake. If you ask me, he added, this young bear's not only lost his memory, he's put his shoulder out as well. One of you ladies had better come with me in case he has to stay in hospital overnight. Thank goodness I put his clean pajamas out this morning, said Mrs. Bird, trying to strike a cheerful note. The ambulance crew soon made up for lost time, and with sirens and wailing, Paddington reached the hospital in no time at all. Stand by for a young bear emergency, said the driver to the waiting staff. And with a count of 1, 2, 3, they lifted Paddington onto a bed. So here Paddington is rushed into the hospital. Is it true that you've lost your memory? asked the doctor. Would you mind repeating the question? asked Paddington. Phew, phew. I don't like the sound of his wheezes, said a nurse. I think we got complications, agreed the doctor. He'd better go straight to X-ray. You've got complications, exclaimed Paddington indignantly. What about me? Paddington had never travelled anywhere on a bed before and he thought it was very good value. There was nothing like this in the darkest Peru, he announced as they gathered speed. Phew, phew. When they reached the X-ray room, the lady in charge pushed a large machine over the bed and made some adjustments. Now lie very still while I take some pictures, she said. Otherwise, they will come out blurred. With that, she went to the other side of the room, pressed a button, and there was a whirring noise. Cheese, said Paddington. Afterwards, Paddington and Mrs. Brown met the doctor again. Paddington stared at the pictures on the wall. What's happened to my fur? He exclaimed. I had it when I came in. It's still there, said the doctor. This is a special camera for looking inside people and bears too, he added hastily. It looks very complicated, said Paddington. I didn't know I had so much inside me. Paddington is surprised to see an X-ray. The one on the left shows why your shoulder is hurting, explained the doctor. The bones come out of its socket. We shall need to put you to sleep while we relocate it. Oh dear, have you had anything to eat since breakfast? asked a nurse. I haven't even had time for my allowances, said Paddington. That's good, said the nurse, wiping his arm with something cold. Otherwise, you would have had to wait while it settled. Paddington felt a tiny prick and he was about to give the nurse a hard stare when his eyelids began to go droopy. As soon as he was asleep, the doctor turned to Mrs. Brown. We'll soon put things right. He won't feel a thing. As for his memory, it probably needs a jog, but a good night's rest often works wonders. I must say, I'm a bit worried about his breathing though. It's a mystery, said Mrs. Brown. I'd never had this problem before. So here we see Paddington woke to find himself in a strange room. Where am I? He asked for the second time that day. You're in a ward with lots of other patients, said Mrs. Brown, and the doctors put your arm back in its socket. I hope it's pointing the right way, said Paddington. Otherwise, I shan't know whether I'm coming or going. I brought you some water, said a nurse. I expect you're feeling thirsty after your operation. I am, said Paddington. I was about to ask for something more exciting to drink, but he couldn't think of the name. Tea, suggested Mrs. Brown. Bless you, said Paddington. I expect they will keep you in overnight for observation, said Mrs. Brown. I don't think I want anyone observing me asleep, said Paddington. I might fall out of bed. Don't worry, said the nurse. The sides lift up to stop that happening. Besides, I shan't be far away, said Mrs. Brown. At that moment, Mr. Brown arrived carrying a ball of fruit from all the traders in the market and a get well soon card from Paddington's friend, Mr. Grobber. Even Mr. Curry sent his best wishes, he said. What it is to be popular. The lady who brought Paddington's supper had been surprised to see him. The boy who used to be in your bed liked his food hot and spicy. She warned, I hope it's suitable for bears. Paddington had told her not to worry. There's nothing wrong with your appetite, said a nurse, eyeing the empty plate. There is now, gasped Paddington, and this time his views sounded as though he really meant them, for he had never before tasted anything quite so hot. I think I'd better leave taking your temperature until you've cooled down, said the nurse. I'll simply feel your pulse to be going on with. Just then, two more nurses came along, pushing a trolley laden with bottles and jars. It's medicine time, said one of them, handing Paddington a small cup filled with pink liquid. I'd like another one of those, please, he announced. I think it's doing me good already. The nurse laughed. I wish we had more patients like you. When it was bedtime, Mrs. Brown helped Paddington wash his whiskers and clean his teeth. If you need anything in the night, she said, just press the emergency button and someone will come. Sleep tight, she said, lifting the sides on the bed. Oh, I shall, murmured Paddington. So much had happened to him, he felt as though he might sleep forever. I think he announced to the world in general, I might have an emergency button by my bed when I get home. I often want things in the night. But he didn't have time to test the one in the hospital, for he was soon fast asleep. There you see, all the children in the hospital are sleeping. Next morning, Paddington went for a walk around the ward to meet the other patients. One small boy had just had his tonsils removed. Another had fallen out of a tree and broken his leg. A girl had been rushed in to have her appendix out. Another boy had been knocked down by a car when he ran across the road without looking. Paddington decided he was really very lucky. You can always see people worse off than yourself in a hospital, said a nurse. I can see why they're called patients, said Paddington. Some of them must have to wait a very long time before they get better. So here is Paddington playing with the little girl. To Paddington's surprise, when he got back to his bed, he found he had visitors. Mr. Brown held up an L-shaped piece of wood. Do you recognize this? He asked. I found it when I was cutting the grass this morning. It's my boomerang, exclaimed Paddington, the one you gave me for my birthday. It's all coming back to me. Like it did yesterday morning, said Mrs. Bird. Blessed thing, it must have flown back when you were testing it and hit you on the head. That's the trouble with boomerangs, said Jonathan. They always come back. You'd better duck next time, said Judy. It's all your fault, Henry, said Mrs. Brown. No wonder Paddington lost his memory. Well, at least it seems to have been jogged back again, said Mr. Brown defensively. Phew, phew, agreed Paddington. And that's another thing, said Mrs. Bird. She held up a small silver object. Guess what? It's a present you gave me in case I have an emergency, said Paddington. It must have fallen out of my pocket. He held the object up to his mouth and blew. Phew, phew, several piercing blasts brought doctors and nurses running from all directions. It's nice to know it isn't broken. When I lost my memory, I forgot I needed a whistle to make my fuse work, said Paddington.